All right, we're live on YouTube and about 2 minutes out from the start of the webinar.
Yeah, and you'll give me the heads up, Chris.
I will. I'll give you the 30-second heads up. All right, Tim, 30 seconds. And go ahead, Tim.
Well, good morning. I'm Tim Sheehy, president of the MMAC, and welcome to the Business of Metro Milwaukee. This webinar has two goals: to provide you with information that helps you make better business decisions and to share insights on the region's challenges and opportunities. The program is sponsored by United Healthcare. MMAC has partnered with United Healthcare to make it easier to find a health plan that works for your employees and your bottom line. United Healthcare's plan offers coverage for companies with 2 to 130 employees, allowing smaller mid-sized companies to take advantage of coverage typically reserved for larger companies, like underwriting for more competitive pricing, better data so you know where your premium dollars are going, and a potential surplus if claims are lower than expected. Access to critical illness, accident protection, and hospital indemnity plans to provide further financial security for your employees. In short, it's a great benefit plan to help you recruit and retain talent in this challenging environment. And finally, the best plug I can give this program comes from the 617 employers enrolled and the 21,000 employees and dependents utilizing the benefits under this program. So if you're interested, contact an MMAC affiliated broker to help you receive discounted rates, or contact your MMAC broker or visit MMAC.org to learn more. So thank you for joining us. We've got two very different topics to cover today. First, we're joined by Peggy Williams-Smith, President and CEO of Visit Milwaukee. She's going to discuss the impact of the RNC and the role that Visit Milwaukee plays in attracting conventions and visitors to the region. The second half of the program will bring back Dr. John Raymond, President and CEO of the Medical College, and his colleague Dr. Tarun Cassini, Professor and Director of MCW Comprehensive Injury Center, to talk a bit about violence prevention, an especially timely discussion given the rising violence across many American cities, including Milwaukee. But let's start with Peggy. So Peggy, welcome and congratulations again on the outstanding job that you've done in leading this community to attract the Republican National Convention. Really applaud the work that you've done in pulling everybody together to do this. So congrats.
Well, thank you very much. It was definitely a team effort. Thank you specifically, as well as our elected officials who really helped make this a reality. They were so supportive and they were so very vocal about this being about bettering the economy of the city, the region, and the state.
Yeah, thank you. As we all keep saying, we're part of the Green Party. This isn't about Republicans or Democrats. It's about bringing money to Milwaukee. And that's a good place to start. Do you want to just give us a bit of an overview on Visit's mission and how you go about executing on that mission?
Sure. So, we changed our mission during the pandemic. Obviously, our role changed in a time when we couldn't attract conventions to the city. Our job is to attract and promote Milwaukee as a great place to work, live, and visit. And we promote tourism to the area to drive economic growth and increase the quality of life for all of those who live and work here. So, we have a full marketing team who is out there every day marketing the city across the country, but especially within a 6-hour drive time, especially right now. And then we have a full convention sales team who is at trade shows every week, making sure that they're telling meeting planners what a great place Milwaukee is to bring their meetings. And then we have a full PR team whose job it is to tell the story of how great Milwaukee is and the Milwaukeeans that live in it that make it great.
Yeah, Peggy, and tell us a little bit again, how are you resourced? How are you funded to do this work?
We are funded through room tax dollars through the Wisconsin Center District. That district was formed in 1994 in order to secure moral obligation to get the convention center built, which it was in 1998. And then we have a multi-year contract with the Wisconsin Center District to provide marketing and sales support for the city.
Great. So those that are really benefiting from your work are the ones funding it.
Correct. Absolutely. It is funded through room tax dollars, but we also, we love to be able to promote. You can't just attract people to a city because of the hotel rooms it has to offer. It's really everything that makes up what is great about Milwaukee. So that's why we are also a partnership model where we go out and we make sure that we're enlisting businesses that can benefit from tourism.
Mm-hmm. So you took over during a very challenging time. What, from your perspective, has changed, or how has tourism and the convention business really changed coming out of the pandemic? What are the biggest things that you've noticed in the change about how you go about doing your work and how people relate to both tourism and conventions?
Well, I think we realized pretty quickly on how important tourism was to the city, the state, and the region. I would tell you that we are on the road to recovery. We're still about 19% where we were in 2000, behind where we were in 2019, and business travel has not come back. Conventions are starting to come back depending on the type of convention.
Mm-hmm.
Some are exceeding 2019 numbers and some are still at about 80% of where they were in 2019. But where we're seeing the lag is in business travel. You are a salesperson who works for a pharmaceutical company and you're usually a road warrior and you're on the road. You can do those calls on Zoom now. And we're still seeing that recovery lag, which probably is not going to recover until 2025. When we look at convention business, our industry trade shows are back at 100%. And these meeting planners, they want to get back to business as it was in 2019. So they are doing whatever they can to attract and promote attendees to their conventions. And that's where our role has changed. Our job used to be just to market to get the meeting planners to book Milwaukee. Now we need to actually market to those individual potential attendees to give them a reason to want to come to Milwaukee to attend the conference.
It seems a little counterintuitive, but can you explain kind of as we're coming out of this, and again, we hope the business is going to rebound, why Milwaukee is adding to its convention center in terms of size and scope during a time where it's really difficult, as you said, and conventions aren't coming back. So you want to talk a little bit about why that works?
Sure. Well, this will allow us to attract multiple conventions at one time. And that is incredibly important. I think one of the biggest, and that this is going to give us that 300,000 square feet, which is going to open us up to so many more meeting planners when sourcing their conventions. You know, we've already seen it start to happen with our ads that we're placing for the future, because people are booking out in 24, 25, 26, and we're seeing double the leads we saw in 2019 for future years, starting back in May. So May, June, and July, we saw more leads than we did in 2019.
Interesting. And the other advantage, as I've understood it for the convention center, is it also allows you to onboard and offboard more conventions. So you don't chew up time. Is that accurate?
It is. A lot of large conventions have move in and move out time. And this allows us to, again, host one convention in one side of the convention center. While they're moving out, we can start to host another one. They move in. So it just makes it gives us an opportunity to fill some of those shoulder dates where our hotels may not have seen that business and had to fill it with, and that's why it's even more important. Without that business traveler, we need to make sure that we can stack conventions one after another to get us back to 2019 numbers.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to deviate here quickly and pick up a question from the audience here. As we've looked across the country, really, and it's really part of the second part of our discussion here on the rise of violence and challenging crime, how has that impacted your ability to market the city? Crime
is increasing across the country. So when we're speaking with individual meeting planners on a national level, they're seeing this across the country. It doesn't make it any better, but it has not been a major source of conversation in the courting phase at this point. For leisure travel is where we're starting to feel some of the effects. When we look at data, it shows that 6 of the top 10 counties for feeder markets for leisure travel coming into the city of Milwaukee are within the state of Wisconsin. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the issues, is that especially right now during a time of political ads and utilizing the increase in crime across the state, that's where we may start to see some of that bite into our leisure travel, because they're seeing Milwaukee as not as safe as the communities they're coming from. We are addressing it. There are some really good people, yourself included, Tim, who are really working hard with our mayor's office, the police department, the sheriff's office, the fire department, to make sure that we're addressing some of these things and that we're trying to make it to solve this community-wide. It's not just a police problem. It's not just a city mayor problem. It's not just a county exec problem. It is all of us trying to figure out ways to solve this issue together. And I think that is part of our role as a destination management organization, is to be part of those conversations so that we have the answers when people do ask us what we're doing to mitigate what's happening.
Yeah. Good answer. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about the RNC and why was winning the RNC bid so important? It's certainly a large convention and you can talk about its impact, but why was it so important to Milwaukee to come out on top here?
Well, I started in November of 2019 and I hit the ground running with the DNC, knowing that we were going to host the biggest convention of our city's existence and what that meant for our city. And obviously, as we all know, March of 2020 happened. And from that point forward, nothing looked the same. So we did a lot of the work as a city, as a region, to get ready and get prepared to host this event. And we never got to see the benefits of it coming to fruition. I feel as though from the minute I started, then Mayor Barrett said to me on every occasion, we're going to go after every political convention. Actually, I got called to his office the week I started to put in a bid for the G7, I believe, summit or something like that. Yeah. I couldn't even remember because it was such a whirlwind at what we were doing. So I think it was always something that our organization felt strongly about was going after both political conventions, both the Democrats and the Republicans for 2024, so that we could put into action what we had planned for 2020.
And so can you talk a little bit about some of the immediate and long-term benefits from hosting the convention?
Well, immediate benefits are we're already seeing people calling, people coming into the city, booking rooms to look at our city for what will happen in 2024. And that's in conjunction with, so if there is a group who supports, if it's an AT&T or if it's a, major corporation, they're going to come here in the next 2 years to scope out what they want to accomplish while they're here. And we've already seen groups coming in to do that. I'm on my third visit this week with RNC officials. So that means that we're going to have people here who are spending money in our city prior to hosting that convention. And then being chosen to host something like this immediately puts our name front of mind when meeting planners are looking for a place to book their convention. So we think that that also has something to do with our increase in leads because of the 1.6 billion impressions that we've gotten being in the news about hosting the RNC in 2024.
So talk about it from the perspective of a Milwaukee resident. What's the convention experience going to look like or feel like for Milwaukee, for people that live here and for businesses that are here?
Well, the businesses that are here are going to see an immediate economic boost from pre-visits, during the weeks leading up, during the actual convention. And I don't know exactly what it's going to look like for residents. I know that we want to make sure that they're involved in the process and understanding what a political convention brings to the city and the political process. So those are conversations that we'll have with the host committee, with the committee on arrangement for the Republican National Committee, to make sure that residents feel a part of what it is that's happening, regardless of your political affiliation. If that means that you're a part of it because you're in a protest zone, peacefully protesting, why you're against something or why you're for something. All of those things are part of hosting a political convention. And we do hope that this will touch every resident that lives in southeastern Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm. So the question from an audience member here, and I know you and I actually have kind of our first really host committee meeting tomorrow. So this may be a bit premature, but how do businesses get information if they want to be a vendor of goods or services for the convention? How will that play out?
Well, so right now we're still working on it. We do have an agreement. The master framework agreement with the city specifically talked about utilizing the city's portal to make sure that the business that is done with diverse businesses as well. So we're not exactly sure what it looks like, but I will tell you that one of my main goals is to make sure that as many businesses, especially just diverse businesses across the region, are able to make money off of this event. So we will be hosting listening sessions. I know that members of my team, as well as Tim's team, as well as other 160 businesses or organizations throughout the community, had a communications meeting last week. And part of what their job will be to make sure that we're communicating throughout the city to make sure that people can be seen and heard to be a part of the convention.
Do we have dates yet?
We don't have dates yet.
Okay.
So we still need to be able to contract the 16,000 rooms in order to secure those dates. So we're still working on that with both the host committee, the Republican National Committee, as well as our hotel community to get to that 16,000 so we can solidify a date. So
give us, Peggy, a little perspective on 16,000 rooms. How far and wide will people be staying for the convention?
So right now we're within Wisconsin, which is great. It means that Wisconsin will be the only economic benefactor of this convention. We have some rooms in Madison at this point, and then we go down as far south as the Racine-Kenosha area. We do have enough rooms within a 30-mile radius to get all 16,000, but not every hotel can commit 100% of their inventory.
Got it. And then, again, as we look ahead at the conventioneers coming here and spending their dollars here, what does, from your perspective, an A+ convention look like for Milwaukee? If you could see past all the hard work between now and 2024, when we come out of this, what would be kind of an A+ convention for you?
I've been spending a lot of time with my counterpart in Cleveland, Dave Gilbert, who was the president and CEO of both their sports commission as well as their DMO. And he was also the president of the host committee. And he told me that coming out of the convention, they immediately saw double the amount of leads going into the convention. They secured the NBA All-Star game. The coverage during the weeks leading up to, including the convention, were so impactful, telling the stories of what Cleveland had to offer, that they were able to start securing more convention business. So beyond hosting the successfully safe convention where, we get to see the political process in action, my hope is that it puts us forefront when people are choosing where to spend their hard-earned dollars to visit on a leisure vacation, a convention, any of those things, because they'll see all that Milwaukee has to offer and say, you know what? That is an amazing city. So they won't get here and say, wow, I didn't realize how amazing it was. They'll be able to see it and they'll say, I want to come there because of how amazing it is.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit about, from what you know, the security issues related to this? There are significant federal resources that come in, but as you and I have talked about, when people talk about security for this event, it's probably going to be the safest place in the United States to be while the convention is going on. But can you talk a little bit about some of the security issues?
Sure. So there's a $50 million federal security grant that we actually took part in for the 2020 DNC, which did allow us to have access to buying equipment that we are able to use to this day. So that will set us up for success moving forward. But we partner with both law enforcement as well as fire and rescue from all over the country. And those people come in here and they ensure that every area and every aspect of this convention is safe. So there probably will not be another safer place during the convention than being here in the city of Milwaukee in southeastern Wisconsin during that time frame. And the team that is assembled through the mayor's office, as well as MPD, MFD, and the county, they were preparing. They were so prepared to host the DNC that they've already got a head start on what this looks like for 2024.
Good. And, since this is Milwaukee, I'm getting questions about parking and traffic. So, I mean, there is going to be disruption here as the security perimeter comes around, and there will be streets and times where people can't access and drive down those streets. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
There will be. There's going to be issues with getting in and out of downtown, but it's something that we will welcome, because there'll be people who will help direct, that can manage around that. We don't know what the security perimeter will look like. We have an idea of the soft perimeter because that was announced prior to the DNC canceling. We never got a full hard perimeter. So those are conversations that we'll start to have once Secret Service gets involved. They're not yet involved. So we don't know exactly what it will look like. I remember during my first few months with Visit Milwaukee being on panels, and I kept saying I would sleep in my office, and my team said, stop saying that. You're scaring people that you won't be able to move in and out of downtown. So I'm not telling people I'll be sleeping in my office during those 5 days, but I do think that you may have to plan a little further in advance to get around.
Yeah, and if people are interested, because this, all is not going to fall on Visit staff, people are interested in volunteering to help out. You have an opportunity for people to volunteer, not only for this, but for other conventions that are in town.
Absolutely. We had 15,000 committed volunteers for the DNC going into what eventually ended up happening. So we're going to be looking, I think that the RNC, because it's a little smaller than the DNC, is their goal is between 8,000 and 10,000 volunteers. But, you know, looking for people who want to be able to direct traffic, drive dignitaries around, there will be plenty of opportunities for the citizens of Southeastern, well, for the state of Wisconsin to get involved in the process and be a part of this convention.
So as soon as we go forward, there'll be a website for people to go to if they're interested in volunteering, and the same thing in terms of being a vendor or providing business solutions to the convention, that will all, in a sense, come together in a website or portal where people can do that.
Yes, and I'm assuming that won't happen. Just as far as the timeline goes, I don't think any of that will start to happen until after January of 2023. The host committee has to hire its paid staff. The RNC has to hire its president of their committee on arrangement, which is the, you know, overarching body of the convention. So those are things that will probably not happen until the beginning of 2023.
Okay. And so again, looking ahead, this is something we expect in late July, early August in 24.
Yes, yes. I would say right now, the 3 sets of dates are the middle of July through the end of August that we're looking at.
And will this cause us to reposition some of the other conventions that have typically come to Milwaukee during that time frame?
So right now, one of the dates interferes a little bit with a convention. So we're looking to move that, but the rest are built in around those sets of dates right now. We have several groups that are looking to book Milwaukee in the summer of 2024, and we're fortunate that they want to be here. So they're willing to wait until we get these dates solidified for them to choose their date. So we're pretty lucky right now with the expansion that will be unveiled in Q1 of 2024. People want to be in Milwaukee. So we do have a little bit of an upper hand as it pertains to the summer.
And Peggy, when you talked about the 16,000 hotel rooms, those are really for, can you explain kind of who those rooms are for? Because it's for more than just the people that are delegates to the convention.
Right. So they have about 2,500 delegates, and each of those delegations may come with themselves as well as a partner. Then we've got state parties that come in. We have corporations who support both the Democrats and the Republicans. They'll want to be here to be part of the process. We've got rooms for security, additional police forces, fire, rescue, Secret Service. We've got people who are affiliated with the Republican National Committee from different states in terms of elected officials. So there will be, it runs the gamut, just like it did for the DNC, of people who will be filling those hotel rooms. And then, of course, media. 15,000 credentialed journalists are typically anticipated to attend a convention of this size throughout the weeks leading up to the convention, that will be telling the stories, not just of the convention, but of all that Milwaukee is and has to offer.
So how do you look at this and weigh the balance between kind of the benefits that you've described and clearly some of the difficulty and disruption that's going to occur in terms of how residents would normally use the city during those periods of time? So how do you look at those two and balance them out?
I think that the benefit of hosting something like this and outweighing whatever the cons may be is the fact that we will be on not just a national stage, a global stage. And I don't think we can put into words, into economic impact, what that means for our city. Since the day I started 25 years ago, downtown Milwaukee, we've always said that we were a secret. It's not known how great Milwaukee is until you get here. I would like in my lifetime to not see that be the case. And we really thought the DNC was going to be the factor that would get us there. And now I'm hoping that the RNC helps us to get to that point, that people will understand and will be able to tell the stories and put focus on why it's important not just, on a global stage, but in our state alone, why Milwaukee is the economic generator for the state of Wisconsin, how important Milwaukee is to the state. And I think those are all important things as we move forward.
So, I mean, it's too flip to say no pain, no gain. But Milwaukee, the challenge we've always had is growth. And that doesn't come without some pain here. And so just again, to emphasize this, as we've talked about this and gone about promoting this to the RNC, we recognize that this is not disruption free, that this is going to cause Milwaukee to do some things that it hasn't done in the past. And again, I think you've been very articulate about recognizing that we understand how that's going to impact the livability of Milwaukee during the time that it's here. But if we don't do something like this, if we don't attract conventions like this, we are not going to be able to grow and achieve some of the things that growth inures to us.
Correct. I like to say that there's a cycle. And as you know, the mayor's goal is to get Milwaukee to 1 million people. 1 million people. So sometimes the first time someone ever sees the city is as a visitor. And once they come here and they say how wonderful it is, there's a chance that when they are choosing where to live, they might live here. And then they'll work here. And the place where people want to work is a place where businesses want to be. I was at the topping off party for the trade, and I was speaking with a journalist from Spectrum News. And as you know, journalists travel around the world from job to job, going to different communities. And he had been putting in to increase, his worth within the company of where he was going to go. And until he saw the Bucks win the 2021 NBA World Championships, he's like, oh my gosh, I'm putting in for Milwaukee. That city looks amazing. And those are the types of things that get people to look at Milwaukee in a different light. And that's what we're hoping the 2024 RNC will do as well.
Yeah, completely agree with you that we're not going to grow our way out organically. And we want to make sure that we attract people here that haven't seen it and that they stay here and grow here with us. Peggy, you've been gracious with your time. Really happy to partner with you on this work. And this probably won't be the only time we'll be talking about the RNC, its impact, and how people can get involved. So thank you very much for squeezing us into your morning, and greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right. So we're going to switch roles here, and we're joined by Dr. Raymond, who's well known to this audience, along with his colleague, Dr. Tarun Cassini, and they're going to join us and talk a little bit about the work that I don't think a lot of people are familiar with in terms of the medical college, the role it has, and the work it does on violence prevention. So while we get the slides set up here, I think we're joined by both Dr. Raymond and Dr. Cassini.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I'll kick it off. First of all, by thanking Peggy and also acknowledging the questions in the chat box about concerns about violence in the city of Milwaukee, which is really a good segue to the work that Dr. Tarun Cassini and her colleagues do. MCW's interest in violence prevention is twofold. First of all, violence has a direct and an indirect negative impact on the health and well-being of the people in the communities that we serve. Second of all, violence erodes the reputation and the vitality and the economic well-being of our region. And as a large employer that contributes to the vitality of the region, we also are concerned about that second aspect. So Tim, if it's okay with you, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tarun Cassini so she can talk a little bit about the great work that she and her colleagues do. Terry is a professor of surgery in the Division of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery at MCW. She's also the director of our longstanding Comprehensive Injury Research Center. She works collaboratively really across the region. The primary partners are Froedtert Hospital, Children's Wisconsin, the Clement J. Zablocki VA Medical Center, the city and the county of Milwaukee, and the state of Wisconsin. I think you'll be surprised to learn about the scope of the center. that spans various aspects of violence and violence prevention, guns, alcohol, suicide, and post-trauma survivorship. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Jerome Cassini.
Thank you, Dr. Raymond.
Thank you, Dr. Raymond. And I just want to say thank you. I'm excited to be here to talk with everybody about the Comprehensive Injury Center. If we could go to the next slide, please. Just want to orient everybody a bit to the Comprehensive Injury Center. As Dr. Raymond said, we've been around for a long time. It was started in the mid-1990s. And right now we have 4 divisions of our Comprehensive Injury Center. The first one is suicide prevention, led by Sarah Kolbeck. The Division of Suicide Prevention is really focused on both not only preventing suicide, but preventing subsequent suicide after a suicide attempt, as well as providing support to loved ones who have lost someone to suicide. In this work, Sarah and her colleagues have created the very first Milwaukee County Suicide Review Commission, where monthly they review suicide deaths that occur in the county and utilize the information that they glean from those reviews in order to move forward with suicide prevention initiatives. She also created our center's very first podcast called The S Word. And every month she and Dr. Andrew Schramm, one of our other faculty, host this podcast and have guests that span survivors of suicide loss to researchers that are researching the effects or how to prevent suicide, to clinicians who care for those who are at risk of suicide. So I highly encourage you to check out that podcast if you haven't. I know it has significantly impacted many who suicide has an impact on their lives. We also have our Division of Violence Prevention, led by Reggie Moore. Our Violence Prevention Division has experienced a significant amount of growth over the last year as we try to address violence, not just in Milwaukee and southeastern Wisconsin, but across the state of Wisconsin. We house the 4 and 4 Life program, which has a community and a hospital component to it. The community component is focused on neighborhoods where violence is clustering the most, to engage in violence interruption and outreach to change social norms related to violence and the use of violence and conflict resolution. We also have a hospital component of the program where individual violence interrupters respond to survivors of gun violence who come to our level 1 trauma center and talk about non-retaliation and talk about safety, as well as connecting survivors with resources to try to affect their trajectory of recovery in a positive way. Since we've started this program, our level 1 trauma center in the Division of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery has also started our Trauma Quality of Life Clinic, which is a multidisciplinary integrative clinic to provide care to gun violence survivors, to increase access to specialty care like mental health, as well as to provide them with allocation of resources and connect them with resources in the community for better recovery. We've also received in our center ARPA funding to create the statewide violence prevention granting program, and that actually got released yesterday. And we're taking applications across the state for organizations to apply for violence prevention funds to engage in additional programming or to pivot programming in order to address violence in their communities. We have our Division of Data Surveillance and Informatics, which is led by Dr. Connie Kostelak, who is an assistant professor here at MCW. Some of the many things that she does, I just want to highlight the VR FAST program. I feel like this is one of the best kept secrets, unfortunately. Although many of you may have seen this in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel article last week about the VR FAST program. It is one of the most highly collaborative group of individuals that spans law enforcement, the fire department, our institution and the Comprehensive Injury Center, the criminal justice system, the county, the city, and where they meet weekly to address trends in violence and also pivot efforts and share information as necessary to try to prevent further violence. And it's a highly collaborative effort, and it was recently funded by federal dollars in order to keep the efforts going. She also leads data evaluation related to opioid overdose in our region. We also have our Division of Data Surveillance and Informatics, our Division of Injury Science led by Dr. Mike McRae. And our Division of Injury Science is really focused on helping to facilitate research in our campus and across the city at the different academic institutions to make sure that we're collaborating and really putting forward the most innovative injury science and community engaged research that we can. And together we will be working on applying for CDC Center funding over this next year to be recognized as a CDC Injury Prevention Center. And lastly, I'll say that we have the Wisconsin Alcohol Policy Project, which is a policy project that is funded by DHS to address overconsumption of alcohol and how that relates to rates and incidents of injury, as well as negative health outcomes. And that is led by one of our public health experts, Maureen Busalaki. So in addition to being the director of the Comprehensive Injury Center, I'm actually a trained clinical psychologist and the medical director for the trauma psychology program at Froedtert Hospital and MCW, where we provide psychological care to survivors of trauma in the hospital. Many of us who work in trauma see the daily human suffering for those that have experienced gun violence and their families, as well as those whose loved ones did not survive their gun violence related injuries. And so the human toll is high, and that human toll also can take a societal toll or economic toll. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Recently, the Everytown Research for Gun Safety published the economic toll of gun violence. And I think it's just really important for us to think about the human suffering that takes place in response to gun violence, as well as the toll that has on our society, as I mentioned previously. And a couple of things that I want to highlight, that there's about a $557 billion annual national toll of gun violence. And Wisconsin is not immune to that, unfortunately. So what it translates to is about $12 billion of taxpayer funds going towards addressing issues related to gun violence. And that looks like things like emergency transport, Social Security insurance, Medicaid, mental health care, and so on. In addition to the cost of investigating the incidents and prosecuting those who were responsible for crime. And so it has a significant economic toll and also has a toll on our hospitals. There was an analysis done about 4 years ago that shows that for every gun violence survivor that's treated at a hospital in Wisconsin, it costs about $76,000. Next slide, please. So there's those direct costs of gun violence, but there's also those indirect costs. And those are a bit harder to capture, but the researchers at Everytown evaluated work loss costs. So when an individual is involved, whether as a perpetrator or a survivor in gun violence, the loss of the potential for them, their work-life loss, as well as the impact that has on their loved ones, who in turn have to care for them and have also an economic loss in having to care for their loved ones. And it also translates to a lost quality of life. If you have ever known someone to survive gun violence and what it takes to kind of move through the suffering and really try to recover, it takes a significant toll, and it's really intangible, but it's really the pain and loss that victims and survivors face as they try to restore their lives back to normal. And oftentimes many of them struggle to do that. So I will leave it there. And I think we'll turn it over back to Tim.
Sure, Terry. Maybe a couple of questions for you. Really focusing on the violence prevention part of the mission that you have here. Mm-hmm. And, I've been around long enough. I've seen so many press conferences where somebody says, this is enough, it has to stop. And as you know so well, so much of the violence in this city and other cities is between individuals who know each other. It is. There's a relationship, something's happened that's triggered that. How do you go about, or how do we go about addressing that, and then B, measuring the impact of some of the interventions that the medical college is engaged in?
Right. No, those are great questions, Tim. And absolutely. We're talking about really changing social norms, right? And so that doesn't happen overnight. We want individuals, and this is part of the work of our violence interruption team, we want individuals to not respond to conflict with an immediate response of violence. We want to help them learn different ways of solving conflict. And that's really what our violence interruption team does. And to shift those social norms takes some time. The Form for Life program, for example, if we're talking about that program, uses something called the Cure Violence model. And adjusting those social norms within community groups is one of the largest well-established outcomes of the Cure Violence program. We've only had the Form for Life program in Milwaukee for a little over 3 years. And so we, as we see change and we see individuals making different choices in relation to resolving conflict, we know that it's going to continue to take repeated role modeling, if you will, and repeated coaching. And that's really a big piece of the violence intervention program.
So it's hard to measure violence that doesn't happen, I guess is what I'm saying. So how do people get a sense that, we're gaining on the challenge? And I realize this just doesn't sit with MCW, but from your perspective and what you're doing, how do people get a sense that we're making progress when it comes to that?
Yeah, you bring up such a good point, Tim. Showing that something was done to prevent something from happening is a bit difficult. And so the things that we do is we track the number of actual interruptions that the team does. And so we've noted that they have interrupted on well over 100 potentially or highly conflictual events. So we track those situations and not just track the interruption that happened in the moment, but also the ongoing engagement with the different individuals that were a part of that conflict to make sure that, some sort of retaliation or violence doesn't ensue a year later, for example. So again, the program hasn't been around for a long time, but those are the types of things that we're doing to follow how well that interruption kind of lasted in changing these social norms. Another thing that we do, for example, on the hospital side, is we track the number of times that an individual meets with one of our violence interrupters, what is discussed in a general sense. And we have different categories now. We know that the main topics of what people are talking about. And then the other thing is, in order for us to address violence, we have to address social determinants of health. And so really making sure that we're not just helping people change the way they resolve conflict, but also helping them to make sure they have the things that they need on a daily basis to live the best quality of life that they can. So connecting them with employment, for example, connecting them with safe housing, for example, and safe, stable housing. So working with other entities in the city and the county to make sure that those resources are available and we're making the best possible connections, because that has implications for reducing violence just as much as the violence interruption itself.
So what is Milwaukee doing that's working? And what do we need to do more of? Or what are we doing, or what aren't we doing that you think we should be doing?
Yeah, I think a couple things. While we really, both in the city of Milwaukee and across the country, we really need to be thinking about preventing violence from happening in addition to responding to violence. And that really takes a public health approach to violence prevention as well as law enforcement. And I will say actually that what we are doing really well is collaborating with MPD in the sense that, and I'm talking more broadly across our division of violence prevention, our division of suicide prevention, and particularly centered in this VR FAST program. I really think our VR FAST program is going to lead the way for other cities across the country to look at how do different sectors of the community who are invested in reducing violence work together in order to, over time, really reduce the incidence of violence that we're seeing. So actually, I think we're leading the way as far as that goes. You had another part of the question, Tim, and I can't recall what it was.
No, I think kind of what Milwaukee's not doing enough of and what it needs to do more of.
Yeah, I would say what we're not doing enough of is I think everybody wants to see our violence, our homicide rates, our non-fatal shooting rates go down and go down instantly. And it's just not, it doesn't happen like that. It grew gradually. Prior to the pandemic, we actually saw a year over year for 4-year decrease in violence. And the pandemic, unfortunately, presented with multiple challenges that I think everybody is trying to figure out a way to address. And I think a big piece of that is that our violence is centered in our communities that are really overburdened and experiencing resource deprivation, poverty. And we, as much as we're addressing violence prevention, we really do, as I mentioned previously, need to be thinking about how do we invest in addressing social determinants of health that have really been centered in certain neighborhoods in our city for a while. Because if we get individuals access to employment, if we get individuals access to safe and stable housing, research and years of research has shown how that helps individuals also move away from experiencing violence, being exposed to violence, and using violence themselves as a way of conflict resolution.
Dr. Raymond, how do you think about the investment that MCW is making in the Thrive On Collaborative as a part of your outreach to impact the community?
Yeah, thank you for asking, Tim. And that really segues nicely from what Dr. Tarun Cassini said about addressing the social determinants of health. We are making a place-based investment where we're helping Royal Capital Group to renovate the iconic Gimbel Schuster department store. And we're going to move literally hundreds of our community-facing faculty, staff, and students into that building and co-locate with the Greater Milwaukee Foundation, which also has made a generational commitment to help neighborhoods find ways to build on their strengths and to address issues that have this really significant impact on health and on violence. So Terry talked about safe and stable homes, living wage jobs, stable educational opportunities, the ability for people to own homes and then pass that wealth that they generate from home ownership onto the next generation in their family. So MCW has made this 22-year commitment with a long-term lease in that building, and through partnership with the 3 neighborhoods that Harambee, Halyard Park, and Brewers Hill, to be there and to be part of providing our talent, our resources, and quite honestly, our humility to try to be part of the solution.
Mm-hmm. Terry, you mentioned something that kind of struck me, that Milwaukee had been on a 4-year, year-over-year decline when it came to violence or homicides. What is the biggest factor that you saw through the pandemic that's really kind of turned that around, almost like a hockey stick?
Yeah, so this is the big conversation with experts nationally about, because it's not just in our city. This is across every major metropolitan area in the country. And I think it was, you have individuals who are in different situations. For example, we saw our domestic violence rates go up nationally, and part of the thought there is that individuals who were staying at home more and staying in close proximity to each other were more likely then to be injured by their abuser, for example. We saw kids, unfortunately, out of schools to try to protect them from COVID. And unfortunately, I think for some kids, they didn't have supervision in order to make sure that they were engaging in virtual school, and then they were getting in conflict with each other. And so I think, and then also, again, we have our communities that were already hit hard by the pandemic, and we saw the clustering of that within certain neighborhoods in Milwaukee for sure. And unfortunately, if you look at the maps of where violence is clustering, it's also clustering in those communities as well. And so I think the lack of resources, and you take individuals who are kind of barely making it, and then you throw the pandemic on top of that. And for some, it has led to a sense of kind of fight or flight. Like they really need to be in a place of trying to survive. And I think for some that pushes them into risky situations related and being survivors of violence or being perpetrators of violence themselves.
This may cross more into a legal question or a law enforcement question, but there's a question here about, the refusal or the decline in charging people with crimes. And does that have an impact on the environment where people are willing to engage it because there aren't as many consequences?
I think consistent consequences to behavior, I think about this as a psychologist, right, are important. And I think that consistency in that is, like I said, very important. I also think that when we have individuals who do not feel safe in their neighborhoods, that has an impact on health for those individuals as well, and their mental well-being, their physical well-being, because they're constantly experiencing stress. And so safety in communities and feeling as though one can maneuver in their communities without risk of their own life or the life of their loved ones is extremely important.
Yeah. Other thoughts, Dr. Raymond or Dr. Cassini, that you have on this?
Well, first of all, I just want to say how much I admire Terry and the work that she does. I think you can see that she's genuine and she really knows the business. And she's also doing it the right way through partnerships, through taking a long view about how to change culture and eliminate some of the underlying root causes of violence. Very, very important to do that. And, Tim, the business community also can be great partners. So when you talked about Thrive On, we're really hoping that we can find ways to invest in meaningful ways in neighborhoods that have potential and a good history, but are currently under-resourced. And so we hope to inspire others to do the same.
Great. In a minute or two we have remaining, Dr. Raymond, I'd be remiss if I didn't come back and ask you a little bit about your thoughts today on where we sit with COVID and just look forward a little bit. It's been a long time since we've talked about that. Clearly, it's still impacting the community. I have a sense, anecdotally, I run into more people now that have been exposed than it seems early on. So I really would appreciate your thoughts on where we sit today and just looking ahead.
Thanks, Tim. Well, we're better off now than we have been through most of the pandemic. The ability of us to rapidly provide oral medications to treat diseases early has been a game changer for us. The vaccines have given us a durable community immunity that's been very helpful. Some minor reduction in transmissions, but major impacts on severe disease, positive impacts. We're also showing the accumulation of previous infections provides some immunity as well that has put us in a much better place. So our hospitalizations are fairly stable, between 400 to 500 people per day in Wisconsin. That's less than 20% of where we were during several peaks. And many of those people are hospitalized with COVID and not because of COVID. So it's a complicating factor, but it's not the primary cause for hospitalizations. Deaths also are down, but they're still about 5 times the death rate that we would expect from a bad flu pandemic. So, we still have some work to do. Going forward, it really depends. If people are fatigued and won't get these bivalent boosters, if they are casual about their approach to COVID-19, we may have surges. If we have a mutant that fundamentally changes the ability of the virus to cause severe disease, it could cause a problem for us. But I truly believe right now we are learning how to live with it. People are resuming business and the normal activities of life. And we have a toolbox that has some pretty effective tools in it that we didn't have even a year ago.
Always hard to give general medical advice, but the advice would be, as people look out here and we get the new variants and the new boosters, is to go ahead and get boosted.
Yes, Tim, and like most experts have been saying, at least for the last year or two, we probably will be recommended to have annual boosters. And like influenza, they will be tailored to the strains of COVID-19 that are most likely to be circulating at the time. This isn't new. This isn't a transformational concept. We do this every single year with with influenza, we can do the same thing for COVID.
I see here, maybe I just got one last question up here. Okay, well, we always trip a trigger with this topic. Why do we insist on using the word vaccine with respect to the shots being provided? Vaccines prevent a person from getting the disease. These shots clearly do not do that. Thus, are they not truly vaccines?
With all due respect, they do reduce transmission. Despite what you may read on social media, there's still about a 50% reduction in transmission, even with these highly transmissible variants. They're called vaccines because that's what they are. Vaccines can prevent disease, but the major purpose of vaccines is to reduce the severity of disease. And these vaccines that are available to us in many ways have done a better job of reducing disease severity than pretty much any other vaccine that we've really ever been able to distribute at this scale.
Right. Well, Dr. Raymond, always a pleasure. Dr. Cassini, very nice to meet you, and really appreciate the expertise and insights you bring to a really challenging problem for this community. And another great example, I think, of the breadth and depth of the rich resources that are with us here at the Medical College. So thank you both for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.